I would really like to welcome everybody today. So it's fantastic that we've got people from all across the nation. So this is it is a webinar that's been put together by the National WSUD Community of Practice, and what we're trying to do is build capacity in integrated water management. So we've just hit 10 o'clock, so I'll just start now if that's all right with everybody. First of all, we have an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge that at the moment, the most amazing thing is we are sitting on so many different people's country. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands, waters and skies of Australia, noting sovereignty has never been ceded. We acknowledge the enduring culture of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the strength of their connection to country, and note that they have looked after and pay thanks to their custodianship of country, and which is ongoing and has been so long in the past. I recommend and acknowledge all of our elders, past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think the amazing thing about recognising Aboriginal connection to water is so strong, and there are so many water stories that we see and hear, and that cultural lens that we all need to acknowledge as water sensitive urban design practitioners, and hopefully we bring more water knowledge in as we are all working. So for those of you who have just joined us, welcome to our webinar today. There is a poll in the chat, which is just trying to get a few ideas on what you think are the key drivers for good water sensitive urban design. So we have over 100 people at the moment, which is very, very exciting. So I'd like to acknowledge all of our capacity building organisations that are our national WSUD Community of Practice, Blacktown City Council, Clearwater, the Derwent Estuary Program from Tasmania, New Waterways is in Western Australia. I should have said Clearwater is in Victoria. Sydney Water, Water by Design, Healthy Land and Water in Queensland, and of course Water Sensitive SA in South Australia. And we work together as capacity building organisations to try and really share knowledge across the country, because of course we can all learn from each other, and that's what we're here to do today. So the agenda that you can see there, we've got 4 incredibly exciting speakers from around the country, and we're going to hear on what their take is on what drives good water sensitive urban design. We then will have a panel session afterwards. So what you have up the top there is a chat function where the poll is. So please feel free to jump in there and answer the poll for us. But also, if you have a question, please pop it in the Q&A function, and then we can answer it through the chat as we go. So our first presenter is Craig Bush, which is very exciting. There we go. And Craig is the acting Waianamarra Stormwater Lead at Sydney Water, who is focused on streamlining the planning and delivery of integrated water management in the Marm Road precinct of Waianamarra South Creek catchment in Western Sydney. This was the first precinct where Sydney Water was declared the Regional Stormwater Management Authority. Prior to this, he had over 13 years' experience at Blacktown City Council, the largest council by population in New South Wales. As the Catchment Projects Officer and Waterways Coordinator, he has a key focus on WSUD and integrated water management to ensure the best outcome for the environment and community, and has been involved in large WSUD projects such as the Angus Creek Stormwater Harvesting Scheme and Blacktown Showground. Can everybody please welcome Craig to our webinar? So I have stopped sharing, so hopefully that means it is all going to work now.
Yep,
go Craig.
awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'll get my screen up. Okay, it should be loading. Okay, I might just size a bit and present. Okay, g'day everyone. Yep, thanks for the introduction. Yep, my name is Craig Bush. As indicated, I work for Sydney Water as the acting Waianamarra Stormwater Lead and looking at Mamre Road. So today I'll be talking about how New South Wales and Sydney Water have used this risk-based framework to set the waterway health targets within the new Western Sydney Aerotropolis precinct. I would also like to acknowledge the custodians of the land and water, and for me it's the Darug people in Western Sydney. A quick overview of what I'll be just talking about today will be the Winnemata catchment and the Aerotropolis precincts. So what are some of the drivers that have undertaken to get us to where we are? What makes this project quite different to some of the others within Western Sydney and New South Wales? What's our integrated water cycle management approach? And the status and way forward from this point. So a little bit of background. The Winnemata, or South Creek, is in Western Sydney. It's quite a large catchment, and its actual name in Winnemata actually means mother's place. It's 80 kilometres long, 62,000 hectares in size, and across 6 different council areas. It is transitioning from sort of a farmland or peri-urban sort of landscape into more urban and industrial development. There is obviously some development that's already occurred within those precincts, but they will be sort of more intensifying in their nature going forward as well. So it's a changing place. In regards to the precinct, or the project that we're talking about today, which is this Western Sydney Aerotropolis, this shows a bit of a scale of what it looks like when you compare it to Sydney. So it basically runs from the Harbour Bridge or Opera House all the way to the airport, going north-south, and it's quite a sizable area when looking at it in that sort of context. And a little bit more about the background. I guess some of the constraints, because of it's surrounding an airport and there's noise restrictions and stuff like that, the predominant industrial, it's going to be zoned as industrial. There is some pockets of residential and mixed use, but predominantly industrial, which means quite large format buildings that take up a lot of space and produce a lot of stormwater. Some of the soil conditions are not great as well, as seen on the figure on the right. You've got high salinity, sodic soils, and can be quite dispersive as well. The topography, some areas are nice and flat, however the others it can be quite steep, and trying to fit those zoning or landform into that topography can be difficult. Another sort of potential constraint is the airport requirements. So they actually require, they're quite strict around bird strike and making sure we minimise habitat for birds. And in our response, it's quite difficult, obviously, because we're building large ponds, which I'll get into a bit later. And also the Aerotropolis precinct is across multiple council areas, so trying to make sure we've got good relationships going forward with that. But the opportunities are, obviously, it's quite large, the precinct, and the amount of development that's occurring. So it's great to get all that planning done in one go, or in as succinct as possible. The New South Wales government's been great in supporting the waterway health targets and making sure that they're set in the DCP and the SEP, which I'll be talking about a little bit later as well. And obviously, integrated water cycle management, as we probably already know, its effectiveness is great when it's at a larger scale in terms of costs and implementation. And as part of this precinct, there's obviously some great emphasis on the landscape being landscape-led, and designing with country has been incorporated into those statutory requirements. And Sydney Water, as mentioned previously, was this is the first time at this sort of scale to be looked at as the regional stormwater authority, where we're looking at both the conveyance of stormwater, but also the water quality and reducing flows. So the drivers for WSUD. The Aerotropolis precinct, it's quite big to facilitate the airport, and there's going to be some logistic hubs as well within this space. So the most development is this industrial commercial space. But there is a bit of a mix within the Aerotropolis, looking at the environmental, which is mainly the riparian corridors. There is some pockets of residential, and obviously there is agriculture as well being proposed. However, just initially, from what we've seen, that's also looking to be somewhat industrial zoning as well, with large format warehouses being proposed. So that is a bit of a constraint that we need to consider as well as we move forward in that process. But yeah, the initial precincts is around 7,500 hectares, but there is some future areas that are coming on board later on down the track, which add up to close to 3,500 hectares.
153 people.
Okay, so the next one, some other drivers is we've got, so obviously there's the existing environment that's out there. There's some threatened species such as the Cumberland Plain woodland and community, and the river flat forest. And there's been a bit of work to look at which areas of that we should be protecting and improving to provide a better environment going forward. And then obviously the Winnemata South Creek is identified as having a high ecological value waterways and water dependent ecosystems. So we need to be wary of how we protect and move forward on that. And some of which are obviously sensitive to both pollutants and the flow that's generated, and also the fish habitat. And I know Sydney Water has also been working with, I think it's Western Sydney University, looking at doing some platypus surveys, and we have found the eDNA in a couple of samples, but we're still yet to actually trap one of the platypus to get for research purposes to see how it's going. So there is a bit of work happening in that space. Now within when you're looking at the policies and strategies, there's a whole raft of them looking at this precinct and Western Sydney in general. So they all play, an important part in sort of what drives waterway health protection and then the implementation of WSUD. But just looking at just the main ones is the SEP, which is the sort of the highest level looking down. It sort of provides clear indication that WSUD should be incorporated in part of the development to protect the riparian stormwater and flooding measures and it should be integrated. And the stormwater management system includes all the reasonable measures to avoid adverse impacts. And then the next level down, which is the DCP, again, is quite strong in that it's there to protect, maintain and restore the Winnemata South Creek and its tributaries from managing the impacts from development and looking at the conveyance of stormwater and also life cycle and maintenance and effective management of stormwater going forward using WSUD. So what makes this project different? Obviously, within New South Wales, we generally do look at the fairly standard BAU approach, which is the 85, 65, 45 of the pollutant reduction targets. But there's been some evidence that's been, a body of evidence has been including that indicates that might not necessarily provide the ecological benefit going forward to protect the waterways, and that we need to be looking at more of a site-specific or waterway-specific approach to identify what we should be looking to protect and how we go about doing that. So this is an example of what the existing BAU kind of process may look like for an industrial development, where you may have a rainwater tank to meet 80% non-potable water demand, on-site detention and water quality on-site, or potentially on a regional scale as well. And then the stormwater generated from those developments and from the streetscape goes into a regional basin where it will get treated to meet those targets, but then majority of those flows go into the waterway. Very minimal is actually reduced in that approach. But then once we're working for, or state government was looking to create the frameworks around South Creek and Winnemata. Obviously, they do use this risk-based framework, which is a great document and a great way of looking at how we determine waterway health targets going forward, looking at multiple important components such as the environment, social and economy. And it also leans on that national water quality management strategy in doing so, which is this five-step process. I'm not going to go into it in detail. But basically, you identify the context, you identify some of the issues and how those impact the objectives. You come up with, and you might need to then look at the approach and then how that can be fed back into a cost-benefit analysis. And then if it all sort of works acceptably, then you move through into design and implementation. And with the Winnemata South Creek catchment, they looked at the community values, a lot of which are focused around that ecological health and some of the secondary contact. There was also some sort of values being placed on primary production and aquatic or aquaculture going forward, because obviously the Hawkesbury Nepean does have oysters and other key industries in that space. So protecting them is of great value. And as part of that process, there was a lot of data that was collected within this whole catchment to look at the waterway health and the existing environment to sort of work backwards to sort of say, well, how do we need to protect it and what are the ways in which we need to go through for that? And also, obviously, looking at extensive literature that's been developed Australia-wide and globally. And the outcome was that they set up these waterway health targets based on that data, but then also determining through the creation of tipping points. At what point does that sort of create that negative impact that's irreversible? So how do we avoid that and work out the targets based on protecting that and reducing that impact going forward? So how's that sort of related back into the DCP, also the Development Control Plan requirements for water quality? I've included the standard council, so the 95, 85, 65, 45 reductions, but the winter matter targets are a little bit higher for water quality. So it's the 90, 85, 65. And also there's the second option which is looking at what is the actual allowable mean load. So there's two options. You can just do the basic load reduction, or you can work out specifically the amount that's being reduced depending on the type of development, and I think that's mainly for sort of if there's already existing development and you're making modifications to that. But the big one that's different is that we have a set target looking at flow. So that comes from in the title, looking at the marvellous idea. So the MARV is the manual annual runoff volume. So how we're reducing that, and the target being in a generic speaking, less than 2 megalitres per hectare per year. And industrial development from our modelling sort of normally lands somewhere between, I think it's 5 and 6 megalitres a year. So there's a significant reduction in the amount of flow within the waterways to protect them and provide that buffer to make sure we're not getting past the tipping point. There's also quite extensive modelling required through the music to make sure that the flows sort of pass through these gates to make sure that they're acceptable going forward, which is this image on the right. Okay, so our approach, so similar to what we showed before with the BAU, our approach is that there is still some on-lot controls, being mainly the pervious fractions, so landscaped areas. There still is a gross pollutant trap, and there's still on-site detention, but there will be irrigation of those landscaped areas. But then one of the main differences is we have the inclusion of passively irrigated street trees within the treescape. So that's sort of a council requirement, or does Transport for New South Wales, depending on the type of road, and they're there to be integrated to take some of those flows from our roads to reduce the volume that ends up getting into our regional system. We've also got natural trunk drainage channels which convey the water to those end of pipe systems and contains that 1%, and the regional approach being that we treat the water to those standards, have large ponds that then provide water back to a recycled water system that's then fed back to the precincts to be used for non-potable water demands, such as toilet flushing and irrigation. And we've also got a backup from the Advanced Water Recycling Centre, which is the AWRC, which can provide water for when we're going through drought and there isn't any stormwater to harvest. So within the scheme, the precincts at the moment, Mamre Road is kind of the first precinct that's going ahead, and we've done some scheme planning as part of that process, and this is the image that you can see. Basically, it shows our trunk drainage channels and the basins, which are generally on the edge of the precincts. So there's roughly around 11 kilometres of trunk drainage and 24 basins, which equate to about 65 hectares. So at a regional approach, this is what we need to make sure that we meet those targets going forward. Our trunk drainage channels, being a naturalised system, has a low flow channel, and it does convey that 1%, which is quite important, generally between 20 to 40 metres wide. Sydney Water may not necessarily own the asset, but control it via an easement. And also it's quite important in a way that it provides irrigation water going forward, so that we're helping to achieve the targets through the irrigation of these areas going forward, as long as with the private development. And also it's a key part of making sure that these development areas are cool, providing the vegetation and the cooling through the irrigation as well, and reducing those flows. Then our regional basins, which again form part of the treatment required to meet the targets, generally will consist of a sediment basin being online or offline, wetland and bioretention systems that are coupled. So it just means that the wetland, as it fills up, will drain through the bioretention system before it gets into the pond. So they share an EDD. So it makes the bioretention work a little bit harder to meet those targets. And then the storage pond is sized to meet those demands for the recycled water. So they are quite large. And then obviously, as part of that, we've got harvesting, reticulation systems, end of pipe treatment, so your screen filters, chlorination, UV, all the rest of it, and then obviously maintenance tracks to make sure we can maintain these assets going forward. And then once the water gets into the recycled water system, then obviously there's a distribution network that follows the road alignments so that all developments should have access to this recycled water and use for their non-potable water demands going forward. And generally we'll be making sure that the harvest stormwater is the priority use, so that gets the first use, and then if that runs out or if there's an issue, then it becomes the treated wastewater and last resort potable. So current status and ways to move forward. So Mamre Road, yep. So as part of it, yes, we're the authority, and that was declared in March 22. And we've created some scheme plans that have evolved over time. We're now up to the third scheme plan. We've got some initial indicative approval from the Infrastructure New South Wales as part of our final business case. However, that is dependent on the IPART, which is our sort of independent body that reviews these projects, these large-scale projects, looking at efficiency. So, is it fit for purpose, and is the costs, how's that cost allocation going to occur? So that's still an ongoing process that will be resolved in a couple of weeks. For the Aerotropolis, it's a little bit behind the Mamre Road, in which we're starting to look at developing those scheme plans moving forward. But we do have some areas already identified within the SEP, so that protects those that locks that land away for the time being. And we've also got some development that's occurring through master plan development. So these are 100 hectares or greater developments. So they're already sort of starting to sort of design these WSUD and end of pipe systems and the trunk drainage channels as well. And Bradfield Development Authority have already sort of looking to start construction of some of these assets in the next couple of months going forward. What could improve? Obviously, it would have been great if Sydney Water was made that regional authority a little bit earlier in the DA or DCP process, just so that we could better align ourselves with processes and make sure that those scheme plans could have been done as part of the DCP and any mapping that was done. That would have also better informed some of the zoning to make sure that our basins are adequately sized and within the right areas. And also the roles and responsibilities with councils and the other authorities to make sure it's clear as to who's doing what. That is being worked through, but it is just it's complicated because this is the first time at this scale that Sydney Water's doing it. It's just a bit of a learning curve, and we'll get there. What's next? So obviously, finalise the IPART, register our sort of contribution plan, which is the development service plan. Complete those Aerotropolis scheme plans and adopt those lessons learned that we're going through from Mamre to make sure that that's as efficient as possible. And obviously to continue to work with the development industry and government to deliver these regional infrastructures effectively. And I guess the main driver for good WSUD for us within this precinct, it's mainly around having the instruments within the statutory planning requirements and making sure that as part of development occurs, that both councils and Sydney Water reviewing it and making sure it's being implemented in a way that provides the benefits that's needed to protect South Creek, and we're all working together as efficiently as possible. Next slide, some contacts and some key referencing material. So yeah, that's it for me.
You're on mute, Shelley.
Yeah, you're on mute, Shelley. Sorry.
And I left my microphone on before too, so I'm really not doing very well today, am I? Thank you, Craig, so much for that awesome presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, which we will hold over to the Q&A. But just the first thing, what is the Aerotropolis? Sorry, Craig.
Sorry, it's the Western Sydney Aerotropolis, so it's the new airport for Western Sydney. So obviously Sydney's existing airport, it's reaching capacity, and with as a broader, New South Wales and Australia wide, there was a push to have a new airport in Western Sydney that's currently being proposed to be 24 hours, and I guess a key logistic hub.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you for that. All right. So, and again, people pop your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. It's okay that they're in there, but it would be lovely if they're in the Q&A instead. So thank you, Craig, for that awesome presentation. Now we're moving on to Mark Gibson. So in Queensland. So Mark is the principal engineer for the water management unit at Brisbane City Council. He has extensive experience, more than 25 years in planning, designing, constructing and maintaining large and small scale civil infrastructure such as bridges, bikeways, waterways, transport and drainage networks. Considerable experience in strategic planning, asset management, accounting, financial modelling and the project management of multidisciplinary teams and projects. Wow. Broadly, my experiences included work for mining and civil engineering companies, property developers, insurance companies, legal firms, and many local government entities. Awesome. Please welcome Mark. And he's going to talk about lessons and focuses in WSUD in Queensland, from street trees to creek restoration. Thanks. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks very much. That's very kind of you. I'll just begin sharing if that's okay. I think that's just coming up now. Really enjoyed Craig's presentation, and thank you, Craig, for sharing that with us. That was fantastic. My presentation will be perhaps a little bit different. I intend to share some of our history in Queensland with drivers of water quality, and specifically look at three focuses, including street trees, filtration areas and restoration areas that help WSUD, or has been working with WSUD very closely over the last little while. So I'll without any further questions, we'll keep moving along. So as a brief history, in essentially pre-2000 in Queensland, the focuses were really on squids. Squids is a term coined by Andre Taylor, so that many of you might know, stormwater quality improvement devices. The focus was really on hard infrastructure. How do we remove pollution using some sort of hard infrastructure? There was some look at, of course, softer infrastructure, but it was sort of a bit more on the down low as we were trying to struggle to work out how do we measure and model. Kind of from 2000 to 2003, we particularly focused on trying to grapple with water quality modelling. Some of you might remember XP Aquam. Musics sort of just came on the scene, and we were trying to work how to use them. You might remember we particularly focused on concentrations, and this was sort of when we were looking at load-based analysis. And the first guidelines for using these sort of models in Queensland was published by Brisbane City Council in 2003. In 2003 to 2010, really the industry really surged in WSUD. There was a lot of experimenting with all different types of water quality treatment. Particularly, there was a lot of swales and bioretentions, ponds, wetlands became very, very common. And a lot of councils, a lot of areas, a lot of consulting engineers recommended all sorts of different types. Now, 2010 was the first essentially statewide guideline that we had. This was by Water by Design, and you can see a little picture of that there. And that started to standardize how we did water quality modeling, and a little bit stabilize how we then prepared infrastructure and sized it. We also in Queensland had a state planning policy come out which incorporated the load-based objectives of removing a certain pollutant load from it. By 2013, though, swales and bioswales along roadsides became increasingly common. And in fact became quite a challenge for many local councils. Many of them were built without considering access. They became very, very difficult to maintain and sometimes quite dangerous. And so there was some essentially changes in designs and sometimes they were actually, swales were banned along roadsides in Queensland as people tried to grapple with good design of these things. 2014, street trees began to be explored a little bit more, and filtration areas, filtering or at the end of pipe systems became a focus. And finally, from 2019, became a much stronger focus on renaturalisation of hardened drains as part of WSUD. So I'd like to just look at three aspects of this in a little bit more detail, and use a lot of pictures and show you where we've come from and what's driving it, to see if that can help fit with your experience, or you can compare that to your experience on what you've been learning and doing. I'll start with street trees. Southeast Queensland councils manage the street trees and streetscape improvement projects. And for example, Brisbane City Council, they generally plant about 10,000 street trees a year. So the numbers are not insignificant. But when in 2013, as we were looking at WSUD street trees, they were quite complex. Generally, we had to make sure our street trees were connected to an outlet in the stormwater network. And it would mean that any sort of street tree that had WSUD connected to it had to be right next to a stormwater pit. Here's an example design of a local council that used this sort of design, where they would roll out these sort of bioretention pits for street trees. Very, very expensive, somewhere in the order of $5,000 or $6,000 to install these, compared to a street tree installation cost of, at the time, of about $100. So 500 times more expensive, sorry, 50 times more expensive. So it needed to change. It needed to move. This was one of the great graphs that came out, or the research that came out from Denman in 2011, and you'll see in this graph it showed how street trees would grow much better if they were watered by stormwater compared to if they were watered by the potable water supply. I'm going to use a picture here that I took over in 8 Mile Plains in Brisbane. And on one side, you can see a standard curb and gutter. On the other side, you'll see a stormwater swale. And these two street trees were planted at the same time. And you can see the difference in the foliage and the health of the trees. One gets watered by stormwater regularly, and the other basically gets nothing unless it picks up a little bit of flow off the curb. It's quite significant. So the first trial that was done of street trees up in Queensland was done at Ipswich Road in 2013, and essentially a WSUD garden was planted with a ag pipe and an inlet at each end. And here's a schematic of what it kind of looked like. So stormwater would come down the hill, flow in, flow down the ag pipe, and then flow out the other end. And at the trial, we were essentially testing what does it look like, what type of curb adapter do we need. We put in little bumps to try and trap stormwater. We dropped it. Here's another example where we would cut it in and move it around. If we put a small drop, gravity would assist us. And we ended up with these type of inlets initially. Pretty quickly we realized that doesn't work well, and we've been trialing since a number of different types of inlets for street trees. Here's one here that essentially is a mesh type, and it has proved successful. But we have also a number of different round inlets that we're using now. Street trees have essentially become very much commonplace across southeast Queensland and Queensland, and as Craig mentioned, down in Sydney, I can see that they become very much a standard part of our WSUD environment. Oh, I think I've gone backwards. Another part of WSUD that has certainly taken off in the last 10 years is filtration systems. Now, filtration systems are what they say. That is that at the end of a pipe, we essentially are filtering the water prior to it reaching the creek. We named it creek filtration systems, but it's not really a creek filtration system. It's really a WSUD experience or a stormwater filtration system. And so I'll show you some pictures of here's one that might look like. This is one that was under construction over at Greenslopes, and this is one of our graduate students who was working with us at the time. In the background, you'll see the stormwater outlet surrounded by rock. And to the left of the student, you'll see a concrete weir, which was completely flat, and there is a void behind the weir. That weir is designed to essentially have water come out of the stormwater pipe, pond behind it, and then flow over it, just like a level spreader, but then passing through a filter forest. Let me show you a picture of it planted up a little bit more. So you can see the filter forest. We even put some stepping stones through it. And then you can see here, this is sort of at the far edge of it, just prior to it moving into the creek area itself, where it would go over the bank. These things were quite successful. Here's an example of the sort of stormwater inundation you would get across the filter forest. Here's a picture of it in action. So stormwater comes flying down the pipe. It essentially gets its energy reduced by boulders, then spills out across a level spreading weir. Then it passes from there over the weir in a very, very shallow and low velocity experience, where it can be filtered out, and plants can remove nutrients, and sediment can drop out, and even heavy metals can be picked up. This filtration experience proved to be very, very successful, and it didn't take long for obviously the plants to really take off, and they enjoyed the nutrients, and a lot of the nutrients that would have gone into the creek essentially was picked up. We also trialed an experience like this in a more linear fashion, and this is a plan where stormwater comes out one end, passes down through a linear filter forest. And I'll move quite quickly through this. So here's a picture of it. You can essentially see the channel in the middle, and we're planting up vegetation. Another looking along the longitudinal profile shortly after planting. Here's the outlet. And then we start to see it in operation as it starts to establish. Here it is, sort of after quite a long time, a couple of years and 2 or 3 years. And if you go it now, you can't tell that it's actually a WSUD device. It just looks like bushland. But whenever it rains, the stormwater essentially passes through a filter forest prior to it entering the creek. I'll just share one more experience that we had, which was similar to the first one, where we spread and filtered. This one was done at a very large outlet into a creek. I'll just show you some construction pictures. So this outlet here is much larger. It's about a 1650. So not the conventional one you'd normally expect. So because of that, we used very, very large rock boulders to essentially reduce velocities. In the background there is the creek. And this is a picture of shortly after planting. You can see the large stones, which then moved into a filter forest with a little bit more stones. And then prior to it getting into the creek, that's July 2013. Here it is shortly after, and then here we are a year later as things start to grow up. We found this sort of experience to be very successful and an easy way to actually reduce pollutants entering creeks just by slowing, spreading, and soaking. Here it is 2 years later. And quite cost effective to build, and a good end-of-line solution, which can be quite difficult to find at times. Finally, for my last focus, I'd like to just share a little about one thing that's taking more and more center stage, which is really about rehabilitation of hardened waterways. I'll use this example in Hanlon Park, which is in Stones Corner in Brisbane. This parkland, you can see on the left-hand side, essentially consisted of just flat sporting fields with a deep concrete channel that ran through it. The parkland area was very much used for flooding. There was no water quality benefit at all. It had a very, very urban catchment around it, and it was considered to be quite undesirable to visit. People used it to go through, but not stop at. As you can see on the right-hand side, you can see that essentially the creek has been renaturalized. You can see bike paths and walking paths all the way through it. Here's an example of a pre and post experience where you can see on the left-hand side the deep concrete channel. It's about 2 meters deep, hard to tell in the photo. And on the right-hand side, you can see a naturalized experience. I'll just show you a couple more pictures of the way through. And if you look carefully, you'll observe that the concrete channel, which was taken up, was actually cut up and then reused for essentially bank protection along it. There's also up on the top left-hand side a mound which actually hides a large sewer infrastructure, which was also used and protected by the concrete channel, which was removed. You'll note habitat logs, and you'll also notice that the creek meanders through it. These pictures were taken prior to the vegetation establishing very strongly, but it is looking much stronger now. Here's an aerial photo of what it now looks like, and instead of it being a difficult place for people to go, it's now one of the most sought after places to go. In terms of rehabilitation of species, originally the area had just some very non-native species of fish. After we rehabilitated, we found that fish species increased 15 times, and the volume of fish increased 5 times, and most of them were natives. We've now found that we're picking up large amounts of sediment, nutrients that are being relieved from the upstream catchment, and this has proved to be a good outcome for the city, and one that shows that WSUD can work even in highly urban areas. Just in closing, I'd just like to reinforce that street trees have become a standard up in Queensland and are used kind of as a default. However, they're not able to remove all the pollution that's in a catchment. Naturalization of hardened drains continues, and that's fantastic, and we hope to see more in the future. Maintenance of WSUD continues to drive innovation. Maintenance dollars are low. WSUD numbers are high. And so we are really grappling with how we can make sure that when we put WSUD in, it doesn't require huge amounts of intensive maintenance all the time. We still grapple up here with challenges regarding offsets. Developers love offsets. The challenge is that it passes the risk and particularly the cost of land to local governments. And usually the local governments can't purchase land as cheaply as the developers have purchased it. So overall, offsets drives risk to local councils, and generally can be a problem. Our next focus in Queensland particularly is trying to ensure that privately owned WSUD devices are maintained appropriately. We also generally across southeast Queensland have adopted the SQUIDEP certification from Stormwater Australia, and that's slowly becoming more and more widespread across Queensland. And thank you very much for listening, and look forward to any questions you have later on. Thank you.
Fantastic, Mark. Wow, that was so incredible. And yes, thank you for everybody for the reactions, because that's just such a lovely thing to do. The outcomes you've achieved are absolutely beautiful. So we will get into the questions at our Q&A panel session. So I'd really like to introduce and say thank you to Mark, and he's coming back so you can ask questions at the end. So now we're moving to our third speaker now. So our third speaker is from Western Australia, and we have Brett Dunn, who is the acting regional manager, Peel, Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. So Brett is based in Mandurah, Western Australia, located 70 k's south of Perth. He's local to the region of 45 years and was inspired into the field of environmental science by the Ramsar-listed Peel Harvey Estuary, which is absolutely beautiful. Brett is currently the acting regional manager for the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation in Kwinana Peel, and has worked closely with the government and industry sectors to deliver water sensitive urban design within the catchment of the Peel Harvey Estuary for over 20 years. Brett is also a fellow of the Peter Cullen Water and Environmental Trust in Canberra, and I have to say, Brett is an absolute champion of WSUD and has been for a long time here in Western Australia. So, Brett, if you're happy to start sharing your screen, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Shelley. And look, that was an absolutely beautiful introduction as well. I will do my best to share my screen if that's actually happening. Am I sharing anything that's worthy of looking at, or am I not sharing my presentation at this point in time? Is the presentation going?
No, it's not up. It's not up at the moment.
That's brilliant. This is kind of like, you know, when you're you start FaceTiming with your parents and you always get a picture of their ear because they hold the phone to their ear rather than in front of their face. This is probably comparable to that.
We can see your outlet. We can see your outlook, Brett. So maybe you're just sharing the wrong screen, perhaps.
Yeah, no, there's nothing worth looking at on my outlook at this point in time. Let's try this again. Give me my option.
Shelley, you are muted again, just so you know.
I do. That's terrible, isn't it? You'd think we'd all be good at this by now, but we're absolutely not. But just to let everybody know, Brett has unfortunately been called away before and after this webinar to the Minister's office, so he won't be able to do Q&A, but we'll see how we can answer that. So that was why we didn't run our test beforehand, but have another go, Brett, see how you can go.
Like I said to you beforehand, I apologise that I'm lucky enough to be invited to these things, but I'm not important enough to be able to refuse other things I get told to go to. So that's been my issue, unfortunately. Okay, I think.
Okay, something's coming up. Okay, we're up.
We're up. Sensational. And I'll at least put that on the screen in front of me too, so I don't look like I'm cross-eyed at this point in time. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, look, thanks for the invite to talk to you guys today. Look, Shelley and I have been working together in West Australia for a very long time, both on our private enterprise side of things and the government side of things, to really build capacity in WA's kind of water-sensitive urban design space and really integrate it as a normality into planning and policy development as opposed to a nice thing to do. It's been a bit of a journey in that space, and yes, if you can't tell by the lack of hair follicles I have, it has been that nearly 20 years, and I feel every year of it. But thankfully, Shelley's come out looking okay on the other side of it, but it's been a bit of a harder 20 years on some of us other people. Let's talk about how things have evolved here in WA. Now, we're before our WSUD days. Traditional drainage was pretty much the call here. Now we're on sandy soils of the Swan Coastal Plain, and the whole idea was effectively to get that water off the land as quickly as you can. And of course, that was done by the most efficient mechanism possible, by digging deep drains, putting water into pipes and sending it down into the rivers and the estuaries and the coastline. No real thought process with respect to water quality control. It was really about just getting the water off the land, making sure there was no flood impacts, and also lowering the groundwater if possible as well. You'll see that bottom right-hand picture. There's some of our favourite legacy assets in WA. Again, this is where water wasn't considered as part of the planning process. It was not designed to. So people would go through all their stages of planning, get to subdivision stage and go, hey, what should we do with the water? Let's dig a hole. And you know, not to quote the castle, but not a sensational water-sensitive urban design outcome. Effectively becomes a storage area for shopping trolleys and the occasional dead body. But thankfully, we've for the most part moved on since then. We then got into what was our first WSUD approach, or version 1, and that was, well, let's still dig holes and let's still put water everywhere, but let's make them wetlands, which isn't a bad approach in certain circumstances, can certainly work. However, it became a bit of a one-trick pony over here in Western Australia, where again, that developers weren't having to do the strategic planning up in upper levels of the planning process. And it was, again, just putting all the water into a corner. It said this corner would stay wet and they would plant it out. And some can work, but again, they still would have water quality issues. They became a maintenance headache for local governments as well. Also, the land take associated with that. I mean, once an area is permanently wet, its usability obviously is not very diverse. So again, it was kind of a one-stop shop approach to water sensitive urban design. Was dig a hole, put some plants in it, and that's constructed wetland, which again isn't very holistic way to manage water. Now, where we've got to, or where we try to get to today, is a bit more of a rational approach, and Mark brought it up well before as well, where if you're doing good water sensitive urban design, you can't actually tell it's there. And that's something which we try to achieve, which is almost a double-edged sword, because when you're trying to promote these assets on how they improve water quality and how they produce usable public open space and attractive space, mitigate urban heat cooling, people just look at it and go, what, it's a roadside garden, or someone's planted something in the middle of the road. There's a tree with a grate near it. Yeah, there's some plants over there in the distance. There actually isn't that community interpretation necessarily, or industry interpretation at times, on that, them actually being water sensitive urban design features. So with this approach, obviously now we have water considered at each stage of planning, because to be able to put water close to source in road reserves, in public open space in a clever type way, you need to plan for it. And I think the other part of this is we managed to actually get a little bit more clever when it comes to the advice we were giving as water sensitive urban design practitioners. It used to be, oh look, just put the bioretention area in the park, make it as big as possible, because then we're treating as much water as possible. At the end of the day, if you're only needing to treat the first 15 mils worth of rainfall, there is no need to make bioretention areas oversized, because that takes away usable public open space. And one of the enemies of water sensitive urban design, or getting traction, is bad water sensitive urban design. So it's all about a rational approach to achieve the objectives for water quality and quantity within the urban form. So these are our three approaches that we've ended up. Thankfully, we've evolved pretty much from that starting point. We're not seeing any sumps anymore, and we are essentially between version 1 and 2, but it's a continuous re-education process, and we're going to talk about that a bit. The challenge in all this is, look, in our Swan coastal plain areas, and this area is about I think 1 million hectares of the catchment of the Peel Harvey Estuary, very typical to these areas. We've developed all the easy land, the land that was had a good clearance to groundwater, had a bit of grade to be able to move the water along, had better soils, didn't have so many interconnected wetlands, and actually over here anyway, you could put a bore into the ground and water would magically come out for free, and that would be your irrigation source. It's not that easy anymore. All that land has been pretty much developed, and now we're into these more challenging areas where you're going to get more land take for drainage infrastructure. You're going to need more expenditure for filling the land, for creating grade, subsoil drainage, all those kind of things. So it's not as easy to develop in these areas anymore. That bottom picture is actually, as you can tell, obviously a site for a future industrial development of 1,000 hectares. That is typical to the types of sites that we're trying to develop now. All the easy land has previously been built upon. And this is a bit of a look on how development is both existing and proposed into the future. Look, we originally populated the coastal area where we had a bit of clearance. That was fine. But now with those last houses that flew onto screen magically with my PowerPoint skills, that is now in wetter areas. And these are areas where Perth and Peel are going to be expanding out to a population of 3.5 million, and we've got to put these people in these more marginal areas. So the conversations around water sensitive urban design get tougher because there's going to be more infrastructure outlay and more on cost to developers and less of a profit margin, which becomes a bit of an issue. So how do we do it? Look, I decided to focus in less on the actual physical doing of water sensitive urban design in the infrastructure, and more about the process on how we achieve it. I tried to land on really something catchy in this space, and I ended up coming up with 3 Ps: policy, planning, and people. And one cannot work without the other at the end of the day. Policy, we're setting expectations that, look, land is to be developed in this way, leading in the future in a water sensitive nature. The planning, you need to embed water sensitive urban design principles at every stage of the planning process if you're going to get anything on the ground. If the structure plan doesn't allow for design aspects, to which they could be as simple as road reserve widths. If they don't allow for those design aspects at the structure plan stage, you're not going to get them at the subdivision stage. So these conversations and agreement need to be had early on what the design objectives are to be achieved through the stages of the planning process. And look, people need to bring it together at the end of the day. You can have the best policy in the world, best planners in the world, but unless you've got the people to be able to push it, to be able to negotiate, communicate, collaborate, you're not going to get anything off the ground all the time. I note that picture does have our own Shelley Shepherd within it, and that is probably the most serious and or bored I've ever seen Shelley, to be honest. She's usually a very, very animated character at the best of times, as you know. So the policy framework we have over here. So unlike a lot of the other legislation around the other states, a lot of the legislation actually has water sensitive urban design principles, or at least mentions it within Environmental Protection Acts in other states. We don't have that within our Environmental Protection Act, so it's really been based upon the policy framework and how that integrates into the state planning process is how we get runs on the board in the water sensitive urban design space. So this starts the very start of planning, your big strategic sub-regional structure plans. At the very first start of planning, government's expectations are, look, there needs to be a regional water management report which identifies all your constraints and opportunities with respect to water and environmental assets to be planned to at future stages. Those future stages, there we go, then come at that regional scheme amendment or district structure plan stage. This is where we're demonstrating the land's capability to be able to support the change in land use to become urban or industrial land, and it maps out the constraints to that land take. Because that's that big question. When developers are rezoning land, they want to know, they want to have half an idea of the developable yield. What's the profit margin? What's the business model they're working to for the development of that land? So we need to be able to at least have mapped out, look, these wetlands are going to stay there. There are these drains or rivers on site. They need to be flow into these systems need to be managed to a certain flow rate. That then dictates a certain volume that needs to be set aside and integrated into your public open space. So that negates flooding issues. Onto that then comes the design aspects to those principles. So local structure plans are then supported by a local water management report, and that provides the proof of concept on how water is going to be managed in this urban layout. It shows how conceptually those landscapes are going to integrate water into the design and hopefully achieve those outcomes by which we are, again, creating quality space to live in, both within our road reserves, our residential areas, our public open space. But again, it's done in a way almost by stealth. You can't tell that there's water sensitive urban design implement. It's just a nice place to live. At subdivision stage, this is the final design of all those principles that we've just gone through. So if you see those 4 stages of planning, you have a supporting focused water management report which dictates how water is going to be managed in that landscape, right from the strategic level right down to the subdivision development level. And that's really important because if you started this planning at a lesser stage each time, opportunities are missed. Your best chance to be able to get design objectives on the ground is to have all principles agreed to at the very start and documented, and that becomes your design principles as we move forward through the process. So planning also being the other another important element of achieving WSUD. Now, this is basically that policy implementation in process. So the policy, and this policy that I was just mentioning, originally Better Urban Water Management, which again, Shelley Shepherd was instrumental in preparing. It's also reflected within our latest state planning policy changes, which are currently with the Minister for now. So government still retains the position that water in the landscape at every stage of planning is a very important consideration and remains the decision-making basis of planning decisions. So with this process here, we're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen, we're going from district planning where we're mapping out our environmental assets. We've got some wetlands there. We've got the Peel Main Drain as well. So they are the areas that we need to be able to link our drainage into in the most appropriate way, and also ensure that appropriate land is set aside. Moving into the local structure planning stage, then we're starting to see where the water's going to go in these certain events, what our design principles are for the minor rainfall events and the main events, where our wetlands and buffers are to also be conserved, and then leading on to subdivision, this is the design that delivers it. So in this case, it was a Peel Main Drain, old agricultural drain. You actually see on the bottom right-hand side, you actually see the actual what it looks like outside of the development area. They created a living stream, a beautiful sense of place, environmental asset. Again, this is being able to talk to the fact that a water-based property market can be very strong. When it's not necessary, when it was an old agricultural drain there, it then becomes an asset that increases land prices and creates a beautiful place to live. Also, again, the median strip approach there with median swales. There's two straight kilometres of median swales in this development area. It's really done very well, and that both treats the water quality sensationally and means the infrastructure in the public open space areas are appropriately sized. They don't have to be too big because they're losing the first 15 mils of rainfall at least out of those median swales, so it's not making it to the public open space. So the open space stays very usable and is very easily maintained by the local government. So people bringing it all together. Now this is really, I see this as, again, the really important part, because what policy gives you and what planning gives you is the opportunity to just pass. You can just get by. Look, I just meet the criteria of the policy, so it's okay to go through. It's people that make it better and really deliver top quality water sensitive urban design. Now, part of that people process is the human touch. You need to be able to sit there and look at a development area and kind of say, look, well, what are the motivations of the stakeholders who are in this room? State government wants certain things with respect to sustainable development, efficient use of resources, water quality outcomes. Local government have a lot of those same things as well. They also want that open space to be functional, usable, attractive, but also easy to maintain. That's another big thing as well. We can't sit there and suggest these things be designed, which our local government are going to have to manage at a loss. So there needs to be a rational approach in this space. Developers, obviously, they want their economic margins. They want to be able to market their residential developments as livable neighbourhoods. Now, that's all really important stuff that we can align collectively our motivations towards, because livable neighbourhoods are ones that are green, leafy, cool, they have quality public open space, they have a great sense and belonging of place. All those things can be delivered with water-sensitive urban design outcomes. Also, certainty of outcomes too, being very clear with developers what they need to do. I think the more ambiguous you are when you are guiding developers, they're just going to go back to their stock standard where they're comfortable. If we're going to drag them into this more innovative space, we need to make that as easy for them as possible. And that probably leads on to, when we're bringing people together, we need to seek to solve problems outside of approvals processes. So that is, when a developer puts all the lines on a page, this is how we're going to develop the land. Trying to move those lines become hard once they've already been drawn, because that costs money. If you're able to engage and be motivated to engage as much as possible, pre-development, pre-drafting, pre-anything, just have a conversation. If you have the ability to agree to those design objectives, they can work that into their initial design, and then it becomes easier to be able to get those outcomes. I like to always use the analogy that a lot of the time that when we see these plans come in, we start off with a Datsun 180B. We want to see a Rolls Royce. We end up somewhere in the middle at a BMW or so. So that's really where the negotiate to appropriate position comes into it. Have a rational and relevant approach. You can't do everything all the time. We can't make every street have a bioretention or rain garden on it, or a median swale. There's engineering factors, there's economic factors, there's maintenance factors. So we need to be really really careful when we're in that space trying to get to a collaborative solution. We have to know that we can't get everything we want as a water sensitive urban design practitioner, but look at the wins we can get and the most rational approach to a development outcome. Acknowledging and celebrating successes as well. I know it sounds like something you do just in your own teams, but it's something if you can do with your stakeholders as well, especially with private industry. You know, if they start to build a reputation in this space in delivering a certain style of development and you're enabling that, that is a way for them to market, and that is a way for us to get outcomes that we want to see as well. And again, we're walking a pathway that we've previously provided to them, which means they get more of that certainty when they're developing more land in these areas. Building capacity in people, not just in your teams, but also in your stakeholder groups as well. Being able to learn from mistakes as well. Don't benchmark one issue as being, oh, that water sensitive urban design doesn't work because one time it didn't work. Being able to learn from those mistakes and collectively learn and build capacity, so you know you've got your champions there as well that you can call upon to be able to try and really hit home on design outcomes that everyone wants. Look, I've jumped around a few of those points, but this one's really important. Ensuring a common understanding of water sensitive urban design amongst all the different disciplines that deal with it, like planners, engineers, landscapers. If there's a communication breakdown, the amount of times I've seen a flush curb set up that goes to turf, and that's fantastic. And then the turf is 2 inches higher than the flush curbing. Now, I'm no engineer, but I'm very confident that water doesn't generally flow uphill and doesn't readily jump over 2 inches of turf if that level is different. So having that common understanding around everyone that plans to maintain these assets is really, really important. And so this is just, I'll just finish off with a couple of examples here. This is a development in Byford in Serpentine Jail Island, Western Australia. The tree line is actually a restored agricultural drain, which flows through this area. So we actually had to make sure, because it's an agricultural drain that only holds so much flow, we had to make sure that enough water was held back that we didn't cause flooding downstream. So those areas, though, became, you know, nicely vegetated in this corridor. This was just a sheep paddock, nothing more. It's been a real win to be able to really get that urban heat island effect in this area. You can actually tell as you drive into this area how much different it is to a lot of other development areas. Now, these are the kind of features within it. We've got flush curbs leading into median swales in a couple of areas. We've got some living streams set up where the subsoil drainage will discharge to. So groundwater captured will then discharge to a small man-made creek system, which has some really good vegetation growing on it as well, and also some good water quality treatment within it. Also, because drainage was such an issue here, because of the clay soils and the need to hold back water to ensure we didn't flood, downstream development, but also so the public open space didn't always get wet and become unusable all the time, because there was, again, very little capacity to infiltrate. The local government working with us within the planning scheme, we managed to mandate the use of rainwater tanks, which hasn't been done in many development cases over here. So what those rainwater tanks did, they at least gave an opportunity for first capture for roof runoff, so it wouldn't find its way into the street system and potentially start limiting the usability of public open space. So that's those minor flows where those, again, a lot of capture within road reserves, a lot of flush curbs onto the public open space, dealing with your water quality and your frequent events. And then your bigger flow events, again, having controlled discharge to that drain or living stream type system. Again, achieving ecological outcomes, achieving a really good kind of property value type outcome as well. This area is about 40 k's from the coast, so it's an inland farming area, but they've managed to produce quite an attractive water-based property market out there. Another quick example, this will be my last one. This one is Osprey Waters in Mandurah. Look, again, this one actually borders the Pilharvey Estuary, the Ramsar listed Pilharvey Estuary system. Again, by working together, and you can actually see, it gives a good little bit of a bit of a polar context of, you can see the big lakes there. Those big lakes were part of the first stage of development, which happened to happen about, say, 15 years ago. So that's a classic example of what I was talking about before, that water-sensitive urban design v1.0, where they've gone, let's just dig some holes, we'll put all the water there, and that'll deal with it. Now, those big lakes have water quality issues. They have aerators going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they've been a bit of an issue with respect to mozzies and other disease vector type insects. So that's a good kind of polar opposite to what this next development area did. So from there, so they've gone and really captured water at surface, at source, at any given instance. So they have a living stream corridor which is running next to the road network. We've got crossfall all the way across the carriageway into this living stream. It actually holds frogs within there as well. It's actually a lovely little setup down there. They even have a little viewing platform for some of the wildlife down there, which has worked very well. And again, it's just a roadside drain, but they've done it very, very well. And there's no pipes along that whole section of road networks. In fact, I think there's hardly any pipes in this whole area. So in capturing those small events nice and early, it means that, again, they haven't had to have these big wet areas. They haven't got big areas of public open space unnecessarily sized because they need to hold back a whole heap of water. They're dealing with those frequent events high up in the catchment. And so those minor flows pretty much everywhere, flush curbing, they're hitting bioretention areas, or they're hitting at least rain gardens in the road reserve. And then in those bigger events, they'll eventually discharge out to the Peel Harvey estuary. Again, we've looked after the water quality with those smaller events high in the catchment. So given you have a major estuary system right next to it, in a flooding context, there's no problem to let that clean water go in those greater rainfall events. Okay, that is me. Thank you very much. And again, I really appreciate the invite today. I only caught the last bit of Mark's presentation because, like Shelley said, I've got a few things on today, unfortunately. But I really enjoy these kind of forums, and this collective learning is how we really progress in this space. And WA, wait a while. We do have a lot to learn from our Eastern State colleagues as well. So it's nice to be a part of this forum.
Fantastic, Brett. Thank you so much. And there were a few things in the chat, which I've managed to answer a couple of them, but incredible presentation. Very grateful for your time. Thank you. And now we are moving on to our fourth presenter, which is very exciting. And Jamie Tainton is the founder and principal engineer of Water Studio. And Water Studio is a creative engineering company focused on effective and efficient stormwater solutions. She works with a variety of industry sectors, including land development, local government, and authorities like Melbourne Water. Jamie covers the full breadth of stormwater projects from feasibility, concept, functional, and detailed design. She currently sits on the board for the Association of Land Development Engineers and is the chair of the main drainage subcommittee. And Jamie's going to talk to us about what drives long-term WSUD success. Thanks so much, Jamie. All yours.
Thanks, everyone. I feel it's really turned into a bit of a battle of the states. What's everyone doing? I'm like, oh, I should have maybe reconsidered what I put together, but let's go with what I've got, and we'll give you a bit of a basis of where Victoria's sort of sitting. I will do a quick acknowledgement of country and specifically align with the people near Gardeners Creek, to whom I share my home and walk on country with. It's a lovely space to live. Victoria has been running with planning legislation requiring water-sensitive urban design for, wow, almost 20 years now. Clause 56 came in 2004, 2005, and it covered a requirement for residential subdivision to meet best practice. And best practice in Victoria is 80% suspended solid removal, 45% phosphorus and 45% nitrogen. So it differs slightly to New South Wales. More recently, in the last couple of years, we've got clause 5318, which basically is identical and fills the gaps in between where we're looking at residential in clause 56, we're looking at commercial, industrial and capital works in 5318. So we've basically covered the whole of the state now. Any works require water quality, which is really great. In terms of how that's sort of evolved and developed over time, Melbourne Water have sort of been leading the charge within their jurisdiction to create drainage schemes. And drainage schemes started off with stormwater quality offsets and got to the point where we have these schemes set up. Now, Melbourne Water has over 250 of these schemes. So that's a lot of schemes to run. They have both a hydraulic and a water quality function, and you will pay a different amount for each. And each scheme has a different value. Effectively, they work out the catchment, they work out what assets they need, and then they divide it through by the net developable area, and developers then pay that charge. They will actually build the assets within their development parcel. For example, this parcel here, I think you can see my screen, I'm not sure, but parcel 82, here they would have to build their wetland, and the offsets that they'd have to pay would be offset against the cost of that construction of that asset, and then Melbourne Water and then would sit down and work out some terms that how that might work. So we've had drainage schemes in Victoria long before we had water quality in them, and every scheme is now, almost all of them have got water quality component in them. If not, it's on its way. Now, this governs the Melbourne Water development greenfields area of Melbourne more than anything else, and a lot of the initiatives that I'll go through are probably Melbourne Water based initiatives, but I'll talk a little bit about what happens outside of greenfields and how do we get water sensitive urban design in areas that aren't purely a greenfields development. So Melbourne Water put together the Living Rivers program. Now, this has been going for probably almost 20 years itself, and it's called now called the Incentives Program, and it's rolled a couple of elements into it. But effectively, it started out as a capacity building setup where they had officers that would go over to councils and say, "Hi, how are you going? Have you heard of a rain garden? This is what you should be doing and how we can get involved." So they put together these officers that went out, but also they funded some of the designs for those. They also did matched funding, and sometimes they actually built all of the entire assets. Sometimes they actually paid to put urban design officers inside a particular council that really needed it. The example to the right there is basically just putting some rain gardens or tree pits within car parking in a project that I was part of many years ago. And I think we had 3 or 4 trees in 75 that needed to be replaced. And in talking with everybody there, that 3 or 4 trees was such a small amount. So the amount of water that was being delivered to them really showcased how important it was for water sensitive urban design in these catchments. There's been a few iterations of this program. So it used to be Melbourne Water Officer and a council engagement. Then it went to funding rounds and requests. And then it was called the Incentives Program, and it sort of went through these funding rounds and requests. And now it's just an open program where you can request funding from Melbourne Water for projects, and they will negotiate with you whether they pay for someone like me to come out and design it, or they may pay for matched funding for the construction of the assets. And it really comes down to what benefit it has to the local waterway and how that might be engaged. Now, the program is now tied to what's called our priority catchments. Melbourne Water have worked out where the priority catchments and where the best bang for their buck essentially is. I'll go into that a little bit in a couple of minutes. But so now if you don't have a project within a priority catchment, Melbourne Water's funding programs are a bit more limited now. Another program that they ran between 2008 and 2013 was really, I think, fundamental for building the profile of rain gardens in Victoria. So Keisha Milenkovic was the face of it for Melbourne. She's now based up at Blacktown City Council and has been for a number of years. But that program basically created an opportunity to showcase rain gardens across the state and in projects in public houses, in private houses, and in the public realm. And they really pushed this real drive for 10,000 rain gardens, and they were everywhere. They were in Melbourne Ward. They had this, I couldn't find a photo of it actually, but they had basically a profile of a rain garden that they wheeled around everywhere. It was in Melbourne Water's foyer for a while. It was in expos. It came out at conferences over the place, but it really showed the profile and how a rain garden worked. And I think that resonated with a lot of people to understanding how this system is put together and what it means. Now, this program became probably too successful in the point that whenever we talked about water sensitive urban design, everyone went, oh yes, a rain garden. Well, no, water sensitive urban design covers so much more than that. So we're still today following on from the legacy of this 10,000 rain gardens program, where you go and talk to a council and like, yep, we need a rain garden. I'm like, do you really need a rain garden? Is that really what we need for this? And so we're sort of trying to backpedal out of that a little bit and showcase there are many, many options for water sensitive urban design. To pick up on that, the universities also followed on and did some research associated to justify where things are. We ended up with the FORB spec, if anybody has heard of that, but it's a facility for advanced water biofiltration, and it really set the specification for what we use as a filter media in that space. Another one of the more newer programs that we've got in Victoria is Greater Western Water's Integrated Water Management Plan expectations. So if we're looking at, and I guess I'll just hark back to the real driver for this was the fact that we didn't have a great potable supply to the Greater Western Water area of Melbourne. And so that's sort of inner city Melbourne and out to the west and a little bit to the north sort of covers Western Water. It used to be City West Water and Western Water, and now it's Greater Western Water, all the one. And so because they had this potable supply, I guess, a lack of ability to supply at the levels that they'd want to, they really needed to reach out and find a way where we can offset as much potable supply as we can with a variety of things. So they created this requirement for integrated water management plans. And in that, any developer in that sector, over and above the drainage schemes by Melbourne Water, have to provide an integrated water management plan. What's fallen out from that is basically any lot over 300 square meters has to have a rainwater tank or an alternative water supply, and every house, so every dwelling needs to have a passively irrigated street tree out the front. So council and Greater Western Water have partnered on this program, and it seems to be very successful. There's a passively irrigated street tree out the front of every single dwelling out there, and if you can't put it out the front of a dwelling because it's too there's not enough space, then they're making them putting on side boundaries, and so that the average number is one per dwelling out there. It is stifled innovation a little bit in that, again, people are like, okay, I just need to put a rainwater tank and do this passively irrigated street tree and I'll move on. So yeah, from that perspective, I think we're getting into a little bit of that rain garden space where it'll just be a standard sort of application. Greater Western Water is trying to break the mold a little bit, but we're still working with it. We also have the Healthy Waterways strategy, which I touched on a little bit earlier about priority catchments. So this is a water quality and quantity target, plus it's also got a stormwater harvesting and an infiltration target. So whereas before, when we looked at drainage requirements for development in Victoria based on our catchments and based on our rainfall, you'd sort of assume that you might need 5% of that area, and the drainage scheme sort of averaged out to that. But now with these targets, we're looking at more like 10%. The problem we've got with the Healthy Waterways strategy from a practitioner point of view is it doesn't actually have any teeth. I don't have any legislation that mandates these extra over and above levels. It's starting to change, and there's some pieces of legislation that are starting to look at it and work its way through. So I can touch on that if we need. So just to give you an idea, this is the areas where these Healthy Waterway strategy is actually being applied and where they're looking at these target or priority catchments. So when we look at that incentives program that Melbourne Water is running, if you don't have a project, if your project doesn't land in those blue areas, it's going to be really hard to get funding from Melbourne Water to help you move it along. Another program that we've got in Victoria is the Sunbury Regional Stormwater Harvesting Scheme. So this is one way to meet that integrated water management target that Greater Western Water have put in place. So instead of doing on-lot rainwater tanks, there's going to be an overall regional scheme, whereas all of the wetlands within the Melbourne Water drainage scheme are going to be used to harvest stormwater. They're going to create a trunk main, and they're going to reuse some existing potable supply tanks in the area that are no longer being used. They've been decommissioned out of the potable system. So they're reusing existing assets. Right now, they're trying to work out what demands they potentially have for that. So it's a great initiative, but if they don't have any demands, it's a bit hard to really push this one forward. So they're working on it. So watch this space. And how have we got to this point? And I'd be remiss in not saying that we wouldn't be at this point without Melbourne Water. They're the caretakers of the waterways in Victoria. So it really is their remit, as my understanding, is to protect the waterways. So they've been really pushing all of these initiatives for many, many years. DECA, which is our environment government body, have been at the back end of it, but Melbourne Water is the front end of been pushing this forward. Now, I did say that the Healthy Waterway Strategy doesn't have any teeth at the moment. Where it's probably falling out is the EPA in the last, I think, 2 years created what's called the GED, which is a General Environmental Duty, which is an overarching piece of legislation that actually gives the EPA teeth in Victoria that it never had before. And in that space, we can look at those requirements for the Healthy Waterways Strategy, because the GED basically says do no harm. So if you know that there's a better way of doing things to protect the waterway and you proceed anyway, you can be fined and go through the court proceedings associated with the EPA. So the GED is starting to be used for a stormwater perspective, which is going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. So interesting, councils play a part in all of this too. So while Melbourne Water are providing these drainage schemes and pushing these opportunities, council are actually the ones that enforce those planning scheme clauses. So without them, they're the ones that decide whether or not the initiatives you're putting forward in a development are actually in line with the planning clauses. So they need to have the confidence with all of the proposed work too. Now, drainage schemes, they're part of the team that put that together, so they know where it is. But if you want to vary from the drainage scheme, which no one really does, and we try not to, then council are the ones that really have to own it and make sure that they're on board. Now, this ties into, in Victoria, we are fantastic at creating opportunities and enforcing a requirement for water-sensitive urban design. But the problem that we've got across the board is maintaining those assets. So I'm going to show you through some photos of what happens if you don't maintain these assets, and the sort of assets that we get when we don't. It's all very well that we can apply a capital cost and have these wonderful policies that put water-sensitive urban design in. But if we don't have the financial support to actually look after them once they're in, then we end up with these kinds of assets where we've got, this is a rain garden, water comes out through the pipe over here on the left here, and effectively it just destroyed this area, and the vegetation was ripped out, it died off, it just didn't work from a level perspective. I have to point out that this was also designed a number of years ago, and the way we design these systems is significantly different, and we learn as we go. And I think that's really important to remember, that we're all still learning as we put this together. But if we don't maintain them, if vegetation had have been maintained through this area, I do wonder whether this erosion and this would have really got to this point. This is a really inner city urban design of a rain garden that's in the city of Port Phillip, for those who know Victoria, sort of near Albert Park, where if anyone's into the F1s, it's right around the corner from where we have our racetrack. But this is a rain garden, very urban environment, and if we don't get out and maintain it, it gets covered in leaf litter, and we definitely have blockages that we're looking at as well. We can also go up to that next level, that if we don't continually maintain these things, our pipes and inverts to these systems eventually block, and we've got no water coming into them. So we really need to apply that maintenance side of things. These are some examples of tree pits that we're looking at in residential development. As I said, with that integrated water management plan requirement in Greater Western Water, this is the product of some of those ideas and initiatives. They've got the TreeNet device over here on the right-hand side. We've basically, in the middle here, got what I label is a portal. It's covered in sediment at the moment, but underneath that is sort of a gravel base that allows water and enables water to get in behind back of curb. And then over here, we've got some passive watering and the like. And you can see each of them have got a strong sediment build-up, and particularly in our greenfields, when we have that establishment phase, the build-out phase of the houses just smashes these assets. So we need a better way of looking after them as well. And also our interim assets, and there's certainly a lot of movement on this in Victoria at the moment. This is supposed to be a temporary sediment basin and retarding basin. It's supposed to be fenced off nicer. It's supposed to be vegetated. It's supposed to look nice. And I've used these photos a number of times to reiterate that. Can you imagine being that first home buyer? You buy that amazing brand new home and you're so excited, and you move in and you have your young family, only to find at the end of the street, this is here. Like, a child could very easily go under any of that fencing. It's a high risk and it's not something we should be doing. So maintenance for me is my biggest bugbear with putting any of these assets together. And I really want us to not only, like, as I said, we've got great legislation in Victoria that enforce water quality across the board. But what we don't have is a way to maintain them and a way to fund the maintenance of them. And for me, that's a real problem. But I want to put this pretty picture on the screen because I think, we've got these real opportunities to do these really creative things if we want to. So what I think we need to get this, we need the champion with intrinsic drivers such as Melbourne Water, who are the caretakers of waterways. Without their need to look after the waterways, they wouldn't be driven to focus on water quality as much, I don't think. We need to look at solutions that fit and not just look at, well, rain gardens, everyone's doing rain gardens, let's do that. We also need the knowledge to innovate and the space to innovate and think about how things come back to, and realise that one size does not fit all. And most of all, we need to be in it for the long term. We need to understand the maintenance implications of what we're putting in. We need to allow for that maintenance to be a full reset. None of these assets are set and forget. None of them. We're putting too much water through them. They're high intense for the area that they're treating. And most of all, we need community buy-in. We need the people that are around this space to understand the purpose of what they are and understand that they need to help look after them, to identify if there's problems with them, to engage with the space, to walk in and around them and be part of it. So I know we're running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to finish up there because that's the end of my presentation anyway. But for me, it's all about maintenance. It's all about making sure that we can get these assets in. We need to look after them. So thank you very much, Shelley.
Oh, wow. That was absolutely amazing, Jamie. Thank you so much. We've had such an incredible breadth of presentations today and perspectives. We were only due to finish at 11:30, so we are 1 minute over already. I want to also say thank you to everybody for putting their comments in the Q&A and also in the chat, but also for everybody else to respond to those. So I know Craig's been through and answered quite a few of the questions already. So some of those that we obviously have run out of time, we won't get time for a Q&A, but I would actually just love it if Craig and Mark, thanks Craig's back up there, and Mark as well. I do just have one question for the three of you. So we are talking about, well, what are the key drivers? And we've heard so many different drivers from all the presentations and different perspectives. Brett summed it up as he believes that it's policy, planning, and people. Can I ask each of you how you feel about those three words and whether or not there's one element that is actually more important than the others? Anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in.
Beautiful.
Policy, planning, and people is a great thing, and that's really where you go. But unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that politics trumps all of those, and what we have to have is we have to have politicians on board that allows us to set stronger planning processes. Politicians are really a key part of it, and so governance. Providing a governance for these things is critical. So engaging with politicians is very, very important. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, awesome point. Thank you. Craig or Jamie?
Yeah, I was just going to say similar. That's a good summary, and I like those three pieces. But I guess as well, funding is obviously going to be a key one. Obviously, yes, it's all great to get capital investment to install it, but as Jamie indicated, the ongoing maintenance and rectification of these things as time goes by, that needs to come from somewhere. So we need to think long term, and where that money comes from is important, and it needs to be sustainable as well.
Absolutely. Jamie?
I don't think any outweighs each other. I think they're all really important parts. If you don't have the right policy, then you're not going to get things in place. If you don't have the people, the right champions, like for us, Melbourne Water is a big champion for us, but each individual council has a champion, and we found that is really important. Not only, it's basically having a hierarchy of champions to get things through, so the people is really important. And planning. At the very early stages of water sensitive urban design in land development for us, when clause 56 came in, people were trying to do tiny little rain gardens in little bits and pieces all over the place, and we were getting this hodgepodge kind of response. Whereas when we got to the point where drainage schemes and people were starting, we got really tangible assets that people can walk around, that they can maintain, that we can set up structures where people, and they can be multifaceted assets where, you know, people can engage with the space. They can go and set their little boats off and see what they do in the open water part of a wetland, and people can, you know, fly their kites next to it and be part of it. So if we don't have planning, then we really have really unthought through assets and community spaces, and I think that's what it's about. So no, I can't pick one. They're all important.
Fantastic. That's awesome, guys. Thank you so much. And as I said, we are out of time, unfortunately. But yes, everyone's asking. So we have recorded today's session, and we will let you all know where that is likely to be available. It's more than likely going to go in the West Australian YouTube site. So that's New Waterways. And we do have Louisa, did you have your hand up? So if you would like to ask just one question, but also, as you can all see on the screen, allow mic, allow camera. Nope, she's saying no. Okay, that must have been an accident. So, but what I'd also really like everybody to do, I'm sorry, is fill out this survey. So our little national capacity building program, we're all very under-resourced, and so there's a couple of questions in there just to see whether or not there's value in these national webinars. I believe there is. We had nearly 200 people chiming in at one point today. So I want to thank you all for your time, for listening. I really sincerely want to thank our presenters, Craig Bush, Mark Gibson, Jamie Tainton, and also Brett Dunn, who's no longer here. So thank you guys so much. That was fantastic. We really enjoyed today. So please, everybody, fill in the survey, and we'll let you know when the presentation is available. I just need to acknowledge all of my compatriots in the other capacity building programs that helped get today together. So again, thanks everybody. Have a fabulous day.